you want to be mindful of would be liability in regards to mistakes in programming, so product liability. Breach of the software as a service contract would be another. Unfair and deceptive practices to kind of build on malicious code, and also cybersecurity. So these are all areas of law and liability that could play a big role in the evolution and implementation of smart contracts.
This reminds me of the conversation years ago about open source contracts, the way they're used in business. Is the nature of the smart contract platform being sort of open source impact this from a legal perspective one way or the other?
Well, we see a lot of benefits to using blockchain technology with smart contracts and breaking that down into two distinct buckets. So blockchain technology, one includes distributed ledgers. So the validation is completed by all nodes. So building on Sergey's comments of having multiple parties that would either build the oracle, you would have multiple parties validating the inputs and the language. So there's no central or official copy that would exist as well, because you're using distributed ledger, not centralized ledger. So the user there's no one user that's trusted more than the other. So again, you're distributing that trust mechanism. And then every node of the ledger is responsible for maintaining it. So those are some of the benefits you get with the distributed ledger portion of blockchain technology. And the other side is cryptology. So all blockchains contain cryptology and are secured using cryptology. So the privacy and traceability are fully compatible. So one of the novelties of blockchain is really being able to merge together strong security and privacy at the same time. So you can protect data and the parties to a contract with this cryptography. The signatures would determine the validity, and private keys and public keys manage parties' access to the transaction. So there's a lot of benefits of using and coupling with blockchain with smart contracts.
How do tokens relate to smart contracts? Tokenized stuff. Tell me how that works.
I'm glad you asked. So as you may be aware, attending a blockchain-related session at South by, tokenization, ICOs, initial coin offerings. There's been a huge amount of activity underway with the emergence of ICOs. There's been over $6.4 billion financed through the ICO process just in the past 3 years. So the relationship between tokens and ICOs is very similar. So a token, and I'm taking this definition from Perkins Coie, which is one of the law firms that we work closely with on our Smart Contracts Alliance. A token is an artificial construct designed to give representation of ownership. So technically speaking, a token is a smart contract that contains software code defining the token's functionality and a list of addresses assigning ownership. So tokenization in ICOs is really about the evolution of digital commerce. So we believe that most of the everyday assets that we all engage with throughout our many transactions throughout our life will begin to start being represented in a digital format or a token. And blockchain technology is really leading the way towards that. And those tokens are essentially a smart contract which can represent a different type of ownership based on the use of that token. So it could represent shares or equity in a company. It could represent value, like a cryptocurrency. So you think Bitcoin, think Ether. And it could also represent the rights to a software program or this concept of a utility token. So smart contracts play a huge role in tokenization, which is a trend that really started long before blockchain, but blockchain is speeding up and it's becoming increasingly important and also moving innovation along.
Can a smart contract platform not have tokens, not be based on tokens?
Yeah, I think we have that today. What we would argue at the Chamber is that blockchain brings so many additional positive attributes to smart contracts, both on using the distributed ledger, which I mentioned, and cryptography. So it's possible, but we believe blockchain adds a lot of added benefits.
So I mentioned, Sergey mentioned something earlier about the more complicated smart contract, the smart contracts that are being built on your platform. You said more than just tokens. What did you mean by that?
Oh, I meant that out of the box today, the functionality you have is tokenization. It's kind of just built-in functionality that you spin up a smart contract network or you use the public networks. That's the functionality you have from day one. You don't need to build anything more. You can just begin using it. And so that's the functionality that people have focused on implementing, right? They've implemented tokens for a whole gamut of reasons and use cases, but in our understanding of where the space will go, it'll go towards more complex smart contracts that go beyond just representing ownership of something. So representation of ownership in a contracting sense is probably only 10 to 20% of all contracts. And the other 80 or 90% of contracts that have or will have some form of digital state will be complex contracts. So they will take account of contractual performance through events. They will probably result in automatic payment. Those types of complex smart contracts is what we hope and plan for the space to go towards, because that's the point at which smart contracts become the new standard for digital state, right? That's trillions upon trillions of dollars across the global industries that power banking, insurance, trade finance, the back end of the whole global economy. So, if we can get smart contracts to that level of complexity, to a capacity to replace and be competitive with decentralized forms of digital agreement, they have these unique properties that I think will allow them to do that, as long as we can retain those properties while also allowing them to be as complex as the agreements they're replacing. I think if we can do those two things, then we can move beyond the blockchain and stuff relating to tokenization and move it into kind of this global standard, which is what I feel a lot of the people, at least in our more technical side of the space, are excited about.
So Ken, if you could have smart contracts that don't necessarily have tokens, can you have smart contracts that aren't based on blockchain?
Well, you can have a contract that's not based on blockchain. You can, and arguably, and this is where Sergey and I may just differ. I mean, there's the concept of smart contract has been around for quite a while. I think it was Nick Szabo came up with the kind of the term back in the 80s. It kind of died on the vine because there really was no way to make it cool, and to actually take the trust issue and do something with it. But I've heard a lot of lawyers use the definition of, or the mechanism of a vending machine, for example. There's implied contract in here when you put a buck into a Coke machine and the Coke comes out the other side, that is essentially a autonomous agent that is created, that executed your agreement, your contract. So there's no blockchain in that, and it's not very exciting and sexy, but essentially by some of the raw definitions, it's a smart contract, meaning there's an autonomous agent in there that's taking pre-programmed idea, the pre-programmed concept, and it's taking currency and it's giving you something of value in response to that as a transaction. So yeah, and again, that's why I try to pull apart when I talk about these things, the difference between what a contract is versus a smart contract. And I think most of the technologists would say, when you mentioned this, Sergey, is that no, there's got to be the contract, the legal contract part of it's not as exciting as the concept of a decentralized, distributed, and public sort of ledger being operated upon in a technical sense, creating this exchange. And I think that's why when we put lawyers and technologists next to each other, we sometimes are talking about completely different things when we're talking about smart contracts. And we're trying to get onto some consensus, and we'll get there.
So Perry Ann, are you jump in? Yeah.
No, I think what you're saying makes sense. It's just a semantic issue in our space, right? Smart contract denotes ideas about like smart car, smart home, right? Digitally automated thing. And there's just, so that's that's the more general term in which people look at it initially, but in the way it's evolving in the technical community, it tends to mean digital agreement that's running in a decentralized infrastructure, in a blockchain-based infrastructure, which inherently means a tamper-proof infrastructure, right? So like a blockchain is a tamper-proof data storage mechanism, and a smart contract is logic that uses that tamper-proof mechanism. So if you could calling a vending machine a smart contract, if you said that to somebody in the blockchain space that was like deep into the technology of it and understanding it, they would ask, okay, is it blockchain based? And if you said no, it's likely they would say it's not a smart contract. If you just talk to somebody who just heard smart and contract and stuff, and they understood it in the sense that it's an automated contract, then it's just a semantic issue. I don't think it's fully a fully resolved issue. I think it's just language evolves and it's going to have to evolve like one way or another. It's difficult to predict which way it'll evolve. Like if you had to, you could call it a tamper-proof digital agreement, but that doesn't sound as good or isn't that's not what people are saying. So I think that's the only real issue. That's the difference.
Or it could be made tamper-proof a different way. Are there tools to do that? And I think this also brings up a question. We were talking about agents executing agreements, the notion of tamper-proof or tamper-resistant. So Perry Ann, you're backing this whole industry. Do we need new laws for all these things?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. This is something we've spent a considerable amount of time and resources really working through. In the very specific case of smart contracts, additional legislation is not necessary. So there are and have been efforts throughout the United States, specifically in the states, to start creating new definitions of smart contracts on the state level. There are laws that already exist, thanks to Tom DocuSign and Ken and others who have come before us who really lead the legal foundation for smart contracts and smart electronic signatures. So there are laws that are already in place that permit the use of electronic records in signatures in commerce. These laws are the Electronic Signatures in Global and National Commerce Act, that's known as e-sign, and then the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, also known as UETA. So these laws say that where there is a law that requires a record, an electronic signature suffices. And where a law requires a signature, an electronic signature suffices. So these laws, they use the term electronic, and they were deliberately drafted broad enough to stand the test of time. So their authors knew that technology would evolve, so they kept it broad enough to allow for new technologies over time to be covered by these laws. And we've taken the position that that would absolutely include blockchain technology and the smart contracts that companies in the blockchain space are innovating in. So it's our view at the Chamber, and it's our official position that additional laws on this specific point of adding specific principles related to smart contracts will only confuse the marketplace and hinder potential innovation. So some of you may recall or be familiar with the discussions over the patchwork of state money transmitter licenses that's created 50 different state requirements, which has been just a huge barrier to the adoption of money transmitters, specifically in the blockchain space. And there is real regulatory risk here and legal risk in regards to smart contracts if we were to go down that path of having 50 different ways that we were defining and using and allowing a framework for smart contracts to exist across the states. So again, thanks to e-sign and UETA, we're covered. We don't need any new laws, and any additional efforts could only confuse what's already out there.
What about standards, however? Not laws, but standards. We're talking about oracles that are going to be transmitting information. Is there a standard data set or something that would be helpful?
Yeah, so I think the way the standards for both contracts and data transmission are going to evolve, it's going to be specific to whether there's a large enterprise that already has certain standards, which their systems currently run on. For example, the ISO 20022 standard in banking is a standard that's being widely adopted. And so if there's already a data transmission and a data definition standard that's in place, that's being being widely used, and it can be applied to smart contracts. For example, defining smart contract conditions or smart contract parameters in ISO 20022 that the whole banking industry would understand, it probably makes sense to use that, because getting standards adoption is no easy thing. On the other hand, in other ecosystems like the fintech space or crypto startups or any number of other smaller companies where there's more kind of cutting edge things that fit outside the box, there really are no standards. Those standards will be defined as things evolve, basically, as a certain use case succeeds, and then other use cases mimic their contract. So this actually goes back very well to Tom's earlier question of the open source nature of smart contract code. So the open source nature of smart contract code is a little bit different than how you traditionally have legal agreements, and how I understand it, right? There's like these law firms, and they have very well made templates, and they have their templates, and they keep them relatively private, and some people get access, but a lot of people don't, right? In the context of a smart contract, whether it's run in a consortium environment or whether it's run in a public chain, the relevant parties that want to copy the contract, that want to copy-paste the contract code, they'll be able to do that. And so it's very possible that over a relatively limited number of iterations, you'll arrive at industry standard contracts for derivatives, for certain insurance products, for certain trade finance agreements, those types of things. And those standardized kind of open source pieces of template smart contract code, they will probably then begin to improve on the basis of feedback from the community of people that want to improve them to meet either legal requirements or, it's possible you want to put something about the legal agreement into that open source standard for a derivative or an insurance product or buying a building or whatever it's for. And so it's likely that all those standards will evolve naturally.
Yeah, that's definitely precedent for that. I like to say that 80% of contract law is plagiarism. Most of if you were to hire a lawyer and say, I need a contract for X, Y, or Z, if they sat down and said, I'm going to sit there and draft a new contract for you, fire them immediately, because it's already been written somewhere, someplace, and it's available out there. I just wanted to say something about the work that Perry Ann and the Digital Chamber are doing, and others like the Electronic Signatures Awareness Association. It's really, really important that we stop this train before it gets too far. We've been through this before, back in the 90s. Every state was starting to come up with its own electronic signature laws, so today you wouldn't be able to download an app without meeting 50 different states' requirements for signing onto it. You probably just wouldn't bother. These statutes, the UITA and e-sign, are called overlay statutes. They basically don't change the predicate law at all. They are just say, when we said contract, when we said signature, we meant electronic signature too. And that's really, really important. And what's happening when we take blockchain and stick definitions of blockchain or smart contract into these statutes, it's automatically creating a problem where we're going, well, if they mentioned blockchain, then what else did they not need to put in there? So you have to keep the technology neutral. You have to keep the technology out of it in order for it to keep being able to evolve and mean what it needs to mean as technology does evolve.
So what I'm hearing, and I agree with you, Ken, we don't need more laws. We've already solved this one time. But to the tone of the whole conversation, we don't need more laws. We've already got them. And we're going to have these smart contracts that are basically judged to be valid by their use. So I can just pick it up and use it. I don't need an attorney for that either. So is the role of the attorney going away in this context?
Perish the thought. Like I mentioned, disputes are always there. I think that there's going to definitely be an evolution and a great value being placed on attorneys who know how to code and coders who know how to attorney, I guess. Because as a Python developer, I know that I can run my code, and I know that when it doesn't work, I get told it doesn't work, and it works. I get it to work right, and there's no nuance to it. There's no colorful argument. It just plain doesn't work until it does. that binary nature to things is really anathema to lawyers. Most lawyers hate math so much that that's why they went to law school rather than medical school. And so really we have two sides of the brain that are at work here. And anyone who can kind of put those two together and be able to knock out a smart contract as well as knock out a regular contract or plagiarize one, that you're going to be very valuable in the future. Got some questions, Tom?
When I code Python, that was hilarious, Ken. No, we are running a little bit out of time, and I see we have a lot of questions, so let's just open up the floor. There's a mic in the middle if you have a question. Rattle them off.
Hey, thank you for this great discussion. So I have two questions, I'll state them up front very quickly. The first one is, you mentioned a few use cases in a real estate transaction. So I'm curious to hear, what do you think is the missing catalyst to really jumpstart the adoption of those scenarios using smart contract and how long it will take? So that's the first question. The second question is, I'm a technologist, and sometimes we tend to take a cool solution and try to look for problems to solve with it. So I'm curious to hear from a lawyer perspective, what are some of the interesting problems that are maybe more worth solving using technologies like smart contract?
Sure. Well, I think anytime you have, I think I could probably answer both those questions with the same long, boring diatribe. So please, everybody, stick around. The real estate or mortgage process, the conveyancing of real estate is a good example of the type of use case that makes the most sense. There's multiple parties with multiple interests. There's property to be conveyed. There's a bunch of middlemen and a bunch of costs associated with creating trust, right? And there are folks that have built businesses around creating this trust mechanism. Now, it's the problem as well as a potential solution. The problem is that people are making money off of being middlemen in this. Whether it's a wholesale lender or whether it's a title company, like he left already. Oh, there he is. Okay. Escrow agents, all these types of folks have skin in the game on these things, and everybody agrees that it would be much better to have a different way of doing it. Everyone's pointing to everybody else saying, well, they're the ones that are holding us up because we'll do it. And so it has to come down to consensus and a decision from all those stakeholders, including regulators, that they're going to rely on a different way of doing it. And change is tough. Change is really hard, and it takes a real powder keg of some kind to really kind of blow it up and make it, and maybe it'll be the regulators that actually end up driving it. We don't know. But I know it's an unsatisfying answer, but there it is.
Questions for Ken and Sergey. Will we see in the future, or is it occurring now, where a judge orders Oracle to give adjusted information or misinformation in order to avert a smart contract payout?
Sorry, just to make sure I understand the question. You're asking if there would be a court order to inaccurately inform a contract about an event related to the execution of performance?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah, specifically for the Oracles.
I mean, that's pretty interesting. I mean, let's play through that, right, within the tamper-proof mindset of our space. Within the tamper-proof mindset of our space, if you had that concern and you wanted your contract to be immune to that, to an injunction or this judge scenario, whatever scenario that you're coming up with, you would pay for more decentralization, right? You would, and since you're specifically concerned about how the triggering mechanism would be affected, right? You would pay for decentralization and redundancy and reliability for that mechanism. And how you would do that is you would say, I'm worried that my counterparty will get an injunction. I'm worried that my counterparty will try to, even if I perform, they'll try to get the contract executed correctly. At which point you would go, well, I'm gonna protect myself from that risk by buying 10 oracles, 20 oracles, 50 oracles. I'm going to make them in 50 different countries. Make them in 100 countries and buy 1,000 oracles, right? And then, proportionally the cost would go up. You would need to go to 50 countries, get 50 judges, to issue 50 injunctions, right? If that wasn't good enough, you'd buy more. So it's, if a judge really wanted to, if you really wanted to, you could probably try and figure out every node operator of a smart contract network and get a judge in each of those countries to issue an injunction to each of those smart contract operators to falsify an input or something, right? But you see how it's difficult, right? The point is not that it's impossible. It's theoretically roll made of cheese, but it's extremely difficult to get 50 jurisdictions to serve an injunction about an oracle or a smart contract network. That's the logic of our space. Does that answer your?
Yeah, more for the oracles because
it's very similar.
Yeah.
It's very similar. Just the oracles are a more bespoke mechanism that you can decide what it does. Whereas the smart contract networks are very, very, very firmly defined, which is part of their security model.
Next question?
Two observations about technology and legislative changes. In Texas, we just passed a remote e-notary bill, which is going to be a model for the nation. So some of y'all on the dais may want to look at that. And you also, a definition of good funds seems to be the barrier, the statutory barrier to accepting cryptocurrencies to purchase them. Otherwise, we have to turn it into USD. And so just want to plant that seed with y'all. As we're looking at this space, everybody seems to look at I definitely see the escrow function being something that can be automated and helped out with blockchain and with smart contracts. But with the title function, and this isn't a preservationist, I'm not here to defend the buggy.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
there's two of us.
Yeah, but in the 80s, in the dawn of the computers, my membership, I represent the Association of Title Agents and Taxes and Underwriters. And at the dawn of computers, we tried to automate it. And there were just too many if-thens, and it just got too complex. And I think at one point, you would perhaps, that's what computers do, is they ultimately handle complexity. But I am surprised by the disconnect between folks that say, oh, this is going to disrupt title insurance, and I'm ready to learn, but I don't see how you still evaluate easements, heirs, and chasing down heirs and determining insurability and these type of questions. I don't see how those can be automated, and I'm curious about that response. I'm also curious about, are we starting to look at maybe an AI overlay to some of these questions? And maybe AI plus smart contracts might get us there in terms of handling the complexity and, oh wait, there's an error, here's some odds we're going to play with an AI or what have you. I don't know if both of you